Hey, hey, hey. Welcome to another edition of Man Up, this time on mindfulness. How's it going, Jess?
Good. How are you? You staying mindful today?
And every day, it took me a while to get into the whole art and science behind mindfulness. Back in, I guess, the early 10s, so 2010 through 2012 or so. I was introduced to it by an understudy of John Kabat-Zinn, the writer of numerous books on the topic of mindfulness-based stress reduction, but particularly one of his better, Full Catastrophe Living, and actually through my colleague, Dr. Timothy Cook. But once I learned it, and it's not a hard thing to learn, there's many ways in which to do it. I now do it every day. How about you?
Yeah, it has to be done every day to an extent, right? Because the way I kind of interpret mindfulness is that it's as we go through life, you kind of accumulate these like pop-up windows. So at some point, you got to hit that Control-Alt-Delete button and refresh the page, so to speak. So it's like mindfulness is just kind of getting back into that current moment and not living in the past, aka depression, and not living in the future, aka anxiety. And you have to kind of do that on a day-to-day basis, right? So yeah, it's a practice that I think you have to really reinforce, and you have to just make it part of your default mindset, so to speak.
I love that. And let's get into that. The default mind network, how most of us are pre-programmed to live in the past. I'll excuse myself right away. I'm on the heels of this this virus that still has my throat going into spasms. So I apologize in advance for all the throat clearing. And we got ahead of ourselves immediately, maybe not as mindful as we should have been out of the gate here in terms of first reading the DNA vision mission statement, which is that the DNA company aims to revolutionize medicine with affordable precision DNA testing, functional testing now, like the gut microbiome, healthy aging, pharmacogenomics, even cancer screening for antigens, and clinical consultation that helps people understand their genetic blueprint, or as we like to call it, instruction manual for improved health and longevity. And of course, this webinar isn't intended to be medical advice, so always talk to your healthcare provider or pharmacist before starting or changing any medication or health program. And of course, Justin, as you know, tonight is all about mindfulness, manning up on mindfulness, though, right? So where this journey is sort of a more vibrant, mindful, resilient life that we're trying to all create for ourselves. But in today's episode, we're kind of setting the stage for empowering, I suppose, an exploration if you're new at it, or even a little deeper dive if you're not, about mindfulness can really enhance well-being, with the appreciation as to how our default mode network is set up differently depending on our genetic aptitude, right? But whether you're balancing stress, as we like to call it, managing versus coping, or you're battling it, maybe seeking mental clarity or striving for a stronger relationship and improved physical health, Justin and I, we have a lot to share with you tonight. And so I'd also like to sort of suggest this concept of man up being redefined. So it's the show title. And we use this as a little bit of a quip, don't we? I mean, man up. Get to it, do it, but it's a bold call to sort of confront our inner lives and embrace our emotions and develop mental toughness and all of that, that it brings. But this particular, episode is really lightly challenging traditional masculinity and advocating for emotional intelligence over suppression. So we're really sort of diving into how mindfulness, with its emphasis on openness and present awareness, as you just described, can really profoundly, in some cases, enhance life and relationships. So this is an invitation to folks out there to embrace a new kind of bravery, if you will, living in the moment, not in the past, as you said, not in the future, but that's the point. That's the practice daily in the moment, as often as you can pull yourself back with compassion, courage, and transforming our understanding of strength, including the power found in that particular vulnerability and awareness. Would you agree?
Yeah, I definitely would agree, and I think that it's almost an uphill battle to an extent, right? Because we've got this, let's say, cultural programming as well, to almost have a default victim mindset, like a default scarcity mindset. It's almost related to that as well, and I think that it's like, what's really funny is I was thinking earlier about how when you talk to somebody and maybe you haven't seen them for a little bit, and you say, what's new? How have you been? They immediately, and notice this next time you ask someone that, they immediately start telling you all the negative things that have happened. It's almost this instantaneous thing that takes place. It's very interesting.
Or maybe they're not as open and as they should be, and they just simply say very superficially, "I'm fine," which is just as non-mindful. But I agree.
Yeah, good. You? They'll say it just like that. Ah, good. You? Right. It's almost to brush it off. So as we dissect that a little bit, it's an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? Because it's like, why would we have the immediate thing that comes out of our mouth be each and every negative thing going on in our lives? That's inherently against gratitude. That's against this abundance mindset that we should realistically have. So I think that it's a default that we're meant to wake up with, because we have to earn that PMA, right? That positive mental attitude. So that's where we get into these kind of lifestyle tactics and habits. I know for myself, I wake up negative, and I've got to have certain routines and things in place to kind of, cultivate.
Is that your DNA?
Yes, it's partly my DNA. I happen to have some deletions in ADRA2B and different things where it's like this capacity to make a mountain out of a molehill is there. You wake up with a certain dread, and you've got to instill some level of confidence in yourself.
And I don't think that's uncommon. I think you're talking to the majority when you say that. I certainly, it took a long time before I trained myself to wake up to know that the very first thing I did, or reflex, is to be grateful as I made my way to the washroom and spilled the kidney overflow. But I want to address something that you just said, because I think this is a perfect example as to how we can all immediately become more mindful in our day without trying. And that is to be conscious before we respond to how somebody has asked us, particularly loved ones, as to how we are. They're asking us because they're concerned, and or they are genuinely asking. The pleasantries have a time and place. There's no question. You're not going to divulge and spill on somebody, street side as you're shaking their hand for the first time. That's not what we're saying. But immediately to engage in mindfulness is to understand how your person is in that moment. And if that's an individual who's asking you that you love, you may want to share how you're feeling right then and there in that moment. I think that's a good place to start. And I think that really instills in your brain the idea that you are being real and true to yourself. Living in coherence or congruence is the idea. Hey, before we get any deeper, we always like to kind of start off the hour with what we both separately and together have found sort of as trending. What's in our face? What are we, where's our attention been drawn, either online or on our clinical practices? Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll give her here. So I've just been noticing a lot of different talk about these various ways that you can use molecular hydrogen. And there seems to be controversy around it. A lot of people think that the water bottles are fine. People will use the tablets. You can even inhale it and do it in these various ways. I've always done the tablets myself, and it's a little bit confusing because when you buy hydrogen tablets and you look at the ingredients, it just says magnesium on there.
Yeah.
Well, I think people think they're getting ripped off or something, but it's a particular way they do it that it actually dissolves and becomes H2 in the water. I think that a lot of the water bottles aren't quite there yet. And I think that for the most part, you are better off either inhaling it or using the tablets. That's just kind of currently where I'm at. You got to be aware that hydrogen as well, if you're going to get one of these things that creates it, like an actual big machine, you do have something resembling an H-bomb in your basement, right? So there's a bit of a safety concern there, perhaps, if it's not well made or whatever. But yeah, the hydrogen, I've been doing it. I happen to have a suboptimal antioxidant pathway, so it helps a lot with clearing the free radicals from the mitochondria. So that's where I'm at with that. I'm sticking with the tablets for now. What about you?
I love that. Well, Florida passed this bill recently to ban minors under 14 from having social media accounts. I wish that was the case for my kids. I'm not sure how far that'll expand. I love Florida. As a Canadian, born and raised Torontonian, my mindset is to, and also a dual citizen, by the way, but moving out or down to Florida. I love the politics there. I think they have a lot right. But anyway, for people between the ages of 14 and 15, there's got to be parental consent. So for someone to, basically register a social media account. So with that, I think what's been on top of mind is this whole sort of trend around digital detox and even nature therapy. As we sort of move into spring, my mind's going into, the real routine forest walk, because I love it and I do it all year long. But with tech burnout becoming more common, and certainly as it relates to some of the DNA that we test, some of us are more predisposed to others to this. There's this growing trend towards digital detoxes, spending more time in nature, forest bathing, nature walks, practices that basically promote disconnecting from our digital devices to reconnect with the natural world around us is sort of growing in popularity. And we don't necessarily tie these sort of what's trending into the topic of the day, but this one probably certainly does, as it is very difficult to be mindful when we're always looking at, our social media accounts and posting and all the fakeness that goes around out there. It's bonkers. And, so my wife's a dentist, and when patients are lying down in the chair, she'll offer, a remote control. They can watch the news on the ceiling. And she was just saying to me the other day that she handed this remote to a tween, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, whatever it was, and they didn't know how to work the remote. Kids that's another screen. I'm not suggesting, people should switch out their phones to watch TV. It's a commentary on the whole idea that kids in particular, are spending so much time on their phones and YouTube and streaming. And so it starts with this generation, man. I'm feeling a little concerned about them as it relates to just being on their devices all day. So anyways, happy with what Florida seems to be spearheading. Hope it translates across North America.
Yeah, and it's different, right? Because watching TV, like I grew up watching, television, and it's like there's commercial breaks that you can't like bail out of, and you can't just get exactly what you want at exactly the moment you want. So I think that with things like TikTok and different things, I could see where it would influence attention span, because it's so incredibly instant. The gratification is just there, and then it's gone, and it's on to the next. And there could be some correlation there with this preponderance of anxiety disorders and different things.
Oh,
I
no
think
question.
It's an attention span thing.
No question. Okay, so let's define mindfulness, because this is really where it's, especially for guys, like we just need this sort of concrete definition of what the hell is this? What does it mean? How do I do it? We're going to get into all of that, but I would like to suggest as a distillation, of course, it's a lot deeper than this, but that mindfulness essentially is the practice of intentionally, that's a really key term, focusing one's attention to the present moment. It is very time-based. So the idea is that the future is to come, the past has already gone, now is the only time that exists, and though accepting it without judgment. So it's about being fully aware of what's happening within and around you moment to moment, and engaging with that experience in a kind of like open way, honest way. I don't know if you remember, I certainly remember this to be some kind of a practice to, maybe early days in high school, maybe later days in junior school. I don't know, but the teacher would ask you to grab a pen and a paper and literally just write down a stream of consciousness, right? So you just closed your eyes maybe and listened, and you hear people rustling papers, maybe the footsteps of somebody walking down the hall, somebody swallowing, whatever. I remember that to be maybe the first time unwittingly I experienced mindfulness, not thinking about anything other than what I was experiencing in the moment. Do you remember that exercise?
Yeah, we did that here too. Something resembling that, anyways.
Yeah. I think that's an important sort of to, bring back, to a younger generation and sort of have them experience that more and more, to give them the impression that this is something that ultimately may ground themselves. And that's the definition of mindfulness. There's a few analogies I think that, might resonate with guys. And I brought up the idea earlier around the TV, and how this is just sort of not translating to the younger generation. So maybe this won't translate to them, but it certainly should translate to our generation and older. And the idea that if you consider your mind like a television set with, sort of endless channels to choose from, but that each channel represents different thoughts or emotions and sensations, mindfulness is that remote control. It allows us to observe the programs playing without automatically tuning into the drama or the fear or the reruns of, past and future events. So we learn to watch sort of with detachment. So fully aware that we've got the power to stay on a channel or simply observe it from a distance, but have that momentary experience, like in the now. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it's kind of like the term entertain the thought. When people say like I'm entertaining the thought, and when you actually dissect that a little bit, if you have guests at your house, you could slam the door on them and tell them to leave if they're guests that you're not considering welcome, or you can entertain them, right? So are you inviting them in and offering them snacks and drinks and everything else? That's entertaining the thought. Or are you just closing that door, closing that window and saying, nah, not today? Right. So it's something that you have to actually consciously do, because otherwise they'll just break into your house, some people, you know what I mean? So it's having control over what actually gets let in. I also am reminded of the term train of thought. A train is on a track, and a track is leading to a destination. And maybe we need to kind of alter the track and put it back onto one that's going to be a little bit more productive for us, because it can certainly lead to something destructive as well if we're not in fact mindful of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes beautiful sense. So let's move away from the philosophy and definition of it and get, a little more into some of the benefits of it. And particularly as we love to describe and share, and of course, assess and address at the DNA company, is where is it, that these sort of predispositions to the lack of, or let's call it the reduced ability to be mindful exists in the first place. It's encoded within one's DNA. Who best benefits, whether you've had your DNA tested or not? We'll give you some insights and maybe some, inclination or impetus to get tested. So obviously the health and, optimal functioning of the physical and biochemical brain is, intertwined with the practice of mindfulness. Traditionally rooted in this ancient sort of meditative practice, but you don't have to be a Buddhist monk to do this. And certainly when it's being practiced, there's a lot of modern scientific research to have very tangible effects on the brain structure and function. Essentially, though, but promoting this whole state of brain span. A shameless plug. I just wrote the whole book on this. Like, I literally wrote a book called Brain Spanners, Living a Long, Healthy Life. Health span. It was a playoff on health span. As healthy and as long as you possibly can, but with full cognitive function, full cognitive capacity. So, and I interviewed the best in the field for brain spanning, and guess what? All of them said mindfulness was a part of their daily practice. The idea that, they became aware of the moment, and again, versus this extension into the future or past, which is often where most of us live. Okay, so neuroplasticity, let's start there. Like fertilizer to the soil, we manufacture BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. There is a gene, BDNF, that controls the amount of that BDNF that you might produce. So mindfulness has been shown, number one, to enhance neuroplasticity. And by the way, gray matter density. So not only associated with increased neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections. And by the way, and to your earlier point, I want you to describe this, it is as important to make new connections as it is to disconnect and then maybe reconnect through these habits. So this adaptability, if you will, is the cornerstone of brain health. Memory, learning, cognitive function, focus, attention, alertness, recovery from brain injuries. And then the gray matter density, the research indicates that regular mindfulness can increase that density in parts of the brain, certainly the hippocampus, memory, learning, emotional regulation, feel good, stuff that happens both in the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. But basically all of this suggests that mindfulness not only supports mental well-being, but also the structural health of the brain. Tell us what BDNF is and how, again, connecting, disconnecting, how that all relates and how being mindful might, support that.
Yeah, BDNF, I mean, it's very interesting, right? So it's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And, there's a gene that has the exact same namesake of that. And if you happen to be suboptimal there, we find over and over again, it does lead to this this thing where you have difficulty kind of making new neural connections, right? And learning new skills and the different things that would kind of come alongside that. And full disclosure, I actually happen to be suboptimal there. And it's funny because it manifests almost as being like a subject matter expert, like almost getting fixated on one particular subject, but having difficulty if we don't have the interest in something, actually learning that new skill. So the way I describe it is like I can sit here and talk about genes all day because my mind is kind of there. Like I enjoy those kinds of things. But if I had to go learn a new skill that I just don't have an interest in, I got to call one of my buddies who's good at that, because it's like I don't want to pay it its credence for whatever reason. It also happens to be the concussion gene, right? So there is actually a role here in how your brain can deal with any number of traumatic circumstances. More BDNF means that you can make those, rewire it, let's call it, those neural connections once again. So BDNF is very important for that kind of thing. And there's a number of ways to upregulate it, like you mentioned. And we use coffee and exercise and breath work and heat exposure. And there's a number of ways you can do it. If you're suboptimal genetically, that means that you're going to have a bunch of these things in place daily to always kind of upregulate it. Because again, genes are a default setting. So that's where you're at. We need to have a practice in place to kind of make it more available for the brain.
Okay, so let's talk again, let's reiterate for folks who aren't familiar with this concept of nutrigenomics, and of course, lifestyle genomics. So you have a gene, BDNF, there's a variation of that gene. Dependent on that variation, you're producing more or less of this brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that which creates the spice of neuroplasticity. And if you are otherwise suboptimal in that genetic susceptibility or aptitude, you're going to want to do a whole hell of a lot more to upregulate or address the BDNF being otherwise low. And so where you can't change your DNA, you can modify genetic expression. There's no miracle to this. We're also not talking about CRISPR or, gene sequence editing. We're talking about literally lifestyle and dietary and supplemental interventions to upregulate whatever variation you have. There's also stress or genes, let's call them, that predicate stress expression or how we deal with them. You spoke about one a little earlier on called ADRA2B, and also maybe even COMP. So the other benefit that mindfulness has is lowering cortisol levels. Chronic stress negatively impacts our brain function and structure. That's well known. It shrinks the brain. Literally, too much chronic cortisol shrinks the brain, particularly the hippocampus, the center of memory. And mindfulness practice has been shown to, not only reduce cortisol, but adrenaline, which is the short-acting acute that, when that's chronic, has cortisol release. So it's directly related. The mind and everything is related. And then amygdala shrinking. This is often, as the ADRA2B gene basically relates to the fight or flight center. This is less active and physically smaller in individuals who practice mindfulness regularly. You can turn off your amygdala, right? So this change correlates with reduced stress responses and lower anxiety levels. So how have you found that to be? By the way, I'm also deleted, as are you. I at least have one deletion. So there's ways in which we look at genes. There's SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. There's inserts and deletions, a little more meaningful when we're talking about full sentences of instruction are missing in this instance or added. And then copy number variation. So what we do at the DNA company is far and above beyond what most other companies are looking at. But when we're talking ADRA2B and the fact that you're singly deleted or double deleted, as I'm singly deleted, how have you found mindfulness to improve on that sort of hamster wheel or waking up with that dread?
It kind of makes it mandatory because, the funny thing about the brain is that it doesn't know the difference between a perceived threat and an actual one, right? So the analogy I made earlier about making a mountain out of a molehill, that directly correlates to those stress hormones being released, which are catabolic hormones, right? So, the whole kind of adrenal cortex and the way that whole system works is designed to deal with a very acute, in the moment threat. A friggin' mountain lion jumps out from behind the bushes. Bing, we get a rush of adrenaline. It gives us this immediate kind of blood sugar spike so that we have enough ATP to just jump and sprint and do what we got to do. We don't feel pain for a couple seconds. It gives us a superpower temporarily. The problem is, if you just think those kinds of thoughts, right, those scarcity victim thoughts, you're getting the same effect over and over again. So for us, modern context, you're sitting in traffic or someone cuts you off or something like that, and you get that same spike, even if you weren't truly in danger. So ruminating thoughts, all those kinds of things, engages this same ancient system, and you end up just with adrenal fatigue. You end up with a total cortisol dominance, which, as you said, can have different effects on the brain. They've even done studies about people that were in abusive relationships, and what can actually happen if, let's say, you're married to a narcissist or something like that. It can impact the way that your brain functions over the long term. So this is a very real manifestation of that. So just know that if you're either singly deleted like you are, Bryce, or double deleted like I am, we have this inherent default setting to make a mountain out of a molehill. It's a more intense interpretation by the brain when we have a perceived threat. So it makes it even more important that we have some kind of tactics, something that we can do. How are we breathing, right? Can we get our heart rate back down? Can we zoom out on the situation and realize that we're actually pretty okay in the moment?
Yep. Okay, so we're building the case, folks, for anyone who's just joined us. The idea is we have genetic susceptibilities. Of course, there's environmental. It's all very relevant to day and age and tech function, et cetera. But we're moving through the genes as they predispose us to the benefit we might derive from engaging mindfulness practices in our day-to-day. I think everyone can definitely improve and see benefit from mindfulness, some more than others. That's our point. BDNF, when that's low, COMT and ADRA2B, when you've got variations in those gene sequences, as we're describing, you're going to advantage even more from mindfulness. And by the way, this is free. We're going to get to how we do this, some simple techniques, but this is the freest, most effective. This is more effective than any pill or supplement available, or for that matter, many drugs. I wouldn't say all, but a lot of drugs on the market. Okay, so the other benefit is improved cognitive function, enhancing a whole panel of the genes we look at, including MAO or monoamine oxidase, or dopamine DRD2, the DRD2 receptor. So there's benefits for attention and concentration. It's been linked to improved attention, focus, concentration, reduced mind wandering. That's another key. But the more you practice, the more you're able to bring yourself back to the moment, the less you're likely to have scenarios where you're more predisposed to going down the rabbit hole, right? Anxious. So this is usually, science believes this is due to changes in brain regions associated with attention control, like the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and then executive functioning, right? The entirety of what we look at, regular mindfulness practice enhances executive functions, which include planning, decision-making, impulse control for those who are predisposed to that, alcoholism, drug addictions. These cognitive processes are essential for daily functioning, obviously, and supported by a well-functioning, balanced brain. So when you consult with your clients and they come to you and they say, and by now they're low, or BDNF's not optimal, they have that COMT gene, and the MAO and DRD2 and the ADRA2B, and this is a whole sort of executive function Achilles heel, I suppose. What are at least one of the things that you might suggest they do on a daily basis to ground themselves within the realm of mindfulness?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of things that you can do depending on what's wrong, right? So if it happens to be the ADRA2B deletions, along with, in particular, if you have one of the longer COMT genes, it's really hard to hit that reset button for those kinds of people. So they have a very intense anxiety response, and then it lasts too long, right? They can't quite hit that reset button. So that's where, I'll go right into either the breathwork practice, and I'd like to shout out a particular YouTube channel called Breathwork Beats, like BEATS. I love that one because they string together a whole bunch of different types of breathwork in one session. So it's like alkaline breathing, alternate nostril breathing, all these different things. And then they do the retentions. that's something I have to do daily personally, because I find that it does kind of hit that little bit of a reset button and help me to zoom out. Um, so other than that, things like weightlifting, right, martial arts, these different things that improve confidence, that helps a lot, because I've always found that confidence is kind of the kryptonite to anxiety. The more confident you are, the less in danger you actually feel out in the world. Um, so yeah, get into your body, right? Get out of your head and get into your body. Ground that energy. Remember that emotions are energy in motion, right? So they're useful if you kind of channel them. It's basically like water behind a dam. You know, you got all this energy. It can be used in a destructive manner. If it breaks the dam, it could kill the whole town, or it can go through the turbines and it can power the town, right?
Right.
So some days we wake up with more or less emotional energy. When you have more, you got to go hit a workout. You got to lift, you got to stretch, you got to breathe, get
As
into your
much
body.
as you don't feel like doing it. And, we had this discussion off camera. I know people think, when they think, especially guys are like, I'm not going to sit in a corner like a Buddhist monk, light a candle and do breath work. I'm just not going to do it. And that's fine. I do most of my mindfulness meditation, believe it or not, when I'm doing long distance running, cardio. There's no place or time that's best to do it, only the fact that you do it. And so again, this concept of grounding and living in the moment, our brains are not so adapt to that, because survivalist instincts, that which has sort of, I guess, led our species to where we are successfully millions of years later, is always the default mode network of wondering what's lurking in yonder, wondering what's going to eat us next. And the fact that we're constantly stressed, and the fact that we live through that stress, there's this false notion of, because I was stressed out and lived and survived through that moment or moments, that experience, it was probably the right default mode network to be in. It's not true. It's false logic. Nonetheless, most of us live in that way. There's one other gene, though, I want to talk about, or actually combo of two genes, before we get into some additional strategies and even technology, for which can help a lot of folks, I know for sure, out there, especially guys. A lot of us, we need that logistical, what am I changing? Like, what do you mean live in the, like, what am I seeing difference? We've got some tips for you. But emotional regulation and mental health, boosting 5-HTTL-PR and TPH2 activity. So what I'm saying is mindfulness enhances emotional regulation. We've talked about all these other things it does, but this is probably one of the most important things, because a lot of us walk around emotionally dysregulated. So mindfulness aids in this whole development of a more robust connection between the prefrontal cortex, that's involved in rational thought, and it's often irrational, as I just described. I lived through that because I was stressed. No, you just happened to be stressed and you lived through it. And the amygdala, which is involved in this emotional response, this improved connectivity helps in managing emotional reactions and promotes this whole concept of basically mental stability. Now, I'm not getting into, classic DSM's, diagnostic criteria here of depression, different story. I mean, I get it. We get it. Some people need to, have some additional help and support when we're talking about serotonin, boosting 5-HTTL-PR and even TPH2, the tryptophan hydroxylase, which are the genes in question here. But reduction in depression and anxiety is a very real thing through mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR. And studies have shown that mindfulness meditation can lead to the changes, amazing. This is functional fMRI, in these areas related to mood regulation. And this, practice contributes to decreasing symptoms of depression and anxiety. So we're not curing depression and anxiety. We're saying practicing mindfulness contributes to mood regulation. And this reflects not only in improved mental health, but also, again, in an overall healthier brain environment. So I guess to summarize this, general mindfulness sort of brain span connection basically highlights how mindfulness practice daily, however you get it done, leads to a healthier brain, both structurally and functionally. And for those to know whether they've got variations in, let's summarize, 5-HTTL-PR, which is serotonin reuptake, TPH2 or serotonin production, tryptophan hydroxylase, MAO, DRD2, These are genes involved in dopamine and the whole response and motivation, reward centers, COMT, catechol-methyltransferase, ADRA2B, the adrenaline mix, and BDNF. This is just some of what we test for, folks. The DNA 360 test is what we're talking about to determine your executive function and what mindfulness might bring to some of you more than others. And by the way, I should mention our March promotion is almost ending. So people want to purchase the DNA 360, or even, by the way, DNA aging, we call it. You can save $50. Plus, you get a digital copy of the DNA Way book, which, where am I? You can see it over there in my shelf back there, which is available to the 31st with the code DNA Way 50 at checkout. You have a couple of technologies that you like. We use a whole bunch, and we have some customer. Oh, by the way, shout out, you there was a shout out. You mentioned breathwork beats on YouTube. That's a link in our webinar chat if you want to check that out. I'm going to shout out to one of our clinical partners, Dr. Sachin Patel. He's got like an hour long, I think we even did this with him, breath work as well. So again, a lot of what we're talking about as a grounding methodology to entering mindfulness, being able to be mindful in the now and having all these benefits, often starts with breath work. So talk to us a little bit about some of the technologies you're most excited about that leverage breath work and actually show us as guys what we're doing. Give us like the grassroots of what's happening through this technology and how we know we're benefiting.
Yeah, so I always talk about this brain tap thing, and they have actually got a partnership with something called the Breath Source. So when you go onto the Brain Tap app, there's actually a bunch of their little, sessions that have breath work paired with all the different things that they do. So they do photobiomodulation, both through the eyes as well as through the ears. And then they've got binaural beats playing in the background that are kind of inaudible. And then there's almost a meditation track playing over it. And then some of their sessions, which I do pretty much daily, have breath work added in there as well. So you're taking care of all these different kind of entry points into the brain and into the nervous system as well. So that one's great. There's another app that I friggin' love actually called Othership. I don't know if you've ever messed with that one or not, but they've even got like couples breath work. They've got so many different options on that one. Expert instruction. I believe they're Canadian as well. So I think they're originating from where you're from as well, in the Toronto kind of area. So those two are really, really good. I like the breathwork beats because it's free. There's also I would say Wim Hof is the most known, like the most well-known guy, and he's got his own whole system of pairing breath work with cold exposure and different things to really get a couple of different benefits at once. So those are all great resources. Even just look up Wim Hof method. He's got a ton of awesome stuff on his channel, and world-renowned, world record holder for a bunch of different things. And he attributes that breathwork practice to his ability to handle the cold and the hot and all the crazy stuff that he's done in his career.
One thing that definitely will come out of years of practice, and I know this experiences personally, and I have a lot of anecdotes through my patients who've experienced this, who got serious about it. Of course, mentors that I've learned through is resilience is definitely part and parcel to the outcome. So what comes with mindfulness, and whether it's breath work or leveraging some of the tech that's available out there to see that you're actually doing it, let's just call it, for argument's sake, correctly or optimally, is long-term resilience. The whole concept that we talk a lot about on Man Up, hormesis, not too much stress, not too little stress. So the cold dunking, that's a hormetic stressor. And the more you kind of engage in those stressors, the more you're able to withstand or manage them. But mindfulness, as opposed to purposeful stressor, is, forgetting as best as possible, the brain doesn't like to do it, everything else around you, and focusing on your breath through your heart. And I love the technology of Heart Math. This is a group that's led a lot of the science done by Dr. Roland McCready, and some of their tech called Inner Balance, or the Heart Math Institute, which I believe you can just look up at heartmath.org. But their heart, brain, nervous system sync for physiological coherence. So if you want real lifetime numbers, and this is what I advocate for everyone to get into it who are novices, And then, by the way, this tech is very inexpensive, ranging between 100 and $200. But once you're 3 months in, you don't need this tech anymore. You give it to somebody else who will benefit from it. And what it is, actually, I forgot to bring it to show, but what it is a simple little ear and or thumb applicator that's judging heart rate variability. And it's doing this with some of the most accurate measurements besides an Oura ring or a Apple Watch. But then besides what it's measuring, it's giving you techniques, and it's giving you breath work concepts as to go from what's otherwise incoherent, which you'll see in front of you, thoughts of it picks up essentially thoughts of anxiety and angst and discontent, and all of these are huge algorithms that have been pushed through heart rate variability, and has this sort of almost like a traffic light graduation. So from red to blue, and then into green. So blue as opposed to amber, I suppose, but blue is sort of getting closer to, optimal coherence, and then green, you're there. And so this is the distillation of the science that they've done at Heart Math. When you spend 10 minutes in optimal coherence, and that's their IP, coherence, again, heart rate variability crunched into this optimal number, 10 minutes, and they've done this, by the way, with armed forces, the DoD, and even general public. 10 minutes on this device in optimal coherence translates into 4 hours of parasympathetic state. And this is what we're talking about, bottom line, folks. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is moving from sympathetic state, the state in which you're able to kind of think into the future with anxiety or nervousness, or worry about something in the past. Parasympathetic means you're in a state of rest and digest, bottom line. And so to get yourself into that through this breathing technique and see in front of you translates to heart rate variability coherence that's optimal. Dr. McCready, and I interviewed him in my book, wonderful chapter. He calls this a heart lock-in, and he starts every single day with a heart lock-in. And it is amazing, to start your day. You also talk about Newcom. We're not dedicated to a single company. Obviously, we have a lot of partnerships within the DNA company. But Newcom, Apollo Neuro, these are some others that you've tried or know about.
Yeah. Newcom is interesting. So there's a bit of correlatives between them and BrainTap, but they do differentiate a bit in that. So Newcom doesn't use the photobiomodulation, but one thing that is interesting that they do is they have this GABA disc thing that you put right on a particular part of your arm, and it actually shuts down the adrenal cortex because it actually bypasses the blood-brain barrier to give you some kind of active GABA really quickly, because that way it wears off a bit quick as well, so that you just take the disc off and then you go about your day. So you put the disc on first, it gives you GABA, and then they use really specific binaural beats that they spent about a decade on figuring out, because the problem with a typical binaural beat that you would just buy off of iTunes or whatever is that it can work the first time or two, but the brain is so incredibly perceptive at pattern recognition that as soon as it figures it out, it won't do its job anymore as far as like pulling your brain into these various brain waves and keeping them there. So with Newcom, I mean, they put a whole bunch of work into that with their neuroscientists, and they created a nonlinear oscillating algorithm is basically what they called it. And that means that it actually, your brain can't figure it out. They had to put a whole decade into tricking the human brain. Very difficult thing to do. So the binaural beats keep on changing in a way that it's actually reliable. Your brain will continuously go into theta or alpha or delta or whatever you're trying to get it into. And it actually mimics a full sleep cycle, right? So you can do like a 20 or a 40-minute Newcom session, and it pulls you into theta, which is kind of just a little step above sleep. And that tends to be when your body does a lot of its detoxing and different things, and it hovers you just above sleep to get you a lot of that restoration. So I've found it to be pretty useful. And being a biohacker, obviously I pair that with my PEMF mat. You might as well just do it on that as well, or have the red light pointing at you. There's always a way to stack it. But I found that and BrainTap have both been just amazing tools.
I love it. There's also, headspace, calm, basically you can use this, especially guys that are often facing societal pressures to be the provider as we're describing, and or the proverbial manning up in, tough situations. I think there's a huge impact on mental health that way, which obviously can lead to, heightened stress levels. We all experience stress. Listen, crosses genders. There's no gender that's more stressed, I don't think, than the other. We just deal with it in different ways. And again, substantially more depending on our genetic aptitude. Um, I think there's this impact on physical health. And I think you mentioned already one of the most important things that people need to go to, no matter what energy they feel at the moment, is as soon as they feel anxiety, depression, that's otherwise subclinical. Okay. Because we're not talking about clinical diagnosed depression, but anytime there's that sort of angst, if they just jump into any sort of physical movement, weight bearing exercise, we're meant to push, pull, jump, squat, lift, run, walk. You can do mindfulness, that is to say, even regulated breath during the pauses between those lifts. You can do it during cardio, as I've explained. There's a lot of literature on that. When it comes to heart health, obviously high, stress is a huge risk factor for cardiovascular disease. It's probably the number one North American silent killer for all the reasons we understand. So incorporating mindful walking, for example, into your daily routine, focusing on the sensation of walking and the environment around you. Of course, the Japanese call this Shinrin Yoku, which is forest bathing. So this idea of being mindful, walking through a forest where you're, by the way, getting a lot of negative ion exposure, which is naturally going to boost serotonin, and you're just listening to the wind and the trees, and you're just being mindful of the step and the sound you're getting in each breath, and your breath, which, by the way, one of the best studied styles of breath, which are going to immediately engage a parasympathetic nerve response. Because, and here's the deal, I know you know this, but the idea is you cannot breathe in this way. This is very important. If anyone takes anything away, it's this tonight. You cannot breathe in this way when you're in sympathetic dominant state. That is to say, if you are worried, anxious, running from fear, whatever the case, if proverbial or otherwise, you cannot breathe in this manner of count of four through the nose, hold for a count of 5, and breathe out through pursed lips for a count of 8. You can't do that 4, 5, 8, or 4, 6, 8, or 4, 7, 8. You choose. There's sort of that comfortableness as to how much you're able to hold your breath. A lot of literature says 4, 7, 8, whatever it is, but shorter on the way in, hold, and then a long drawn pursed breath out through the mouth. You do that for 2 minutes, you will shift, whether you're driving and you're having road rage, or you just want to have more focus, concentration, alertness in the moment. You're about to enter into a busy work meeting or something. You want to ground and be mindful. That breath work will instantly, enter you into that state of parasympathetic dominance. By the way, also impact on relationships, right? Like, to be a better communicator, I think it's, being present can improve your ability to listen and communicate effectively, fostering stronger relationship with a partner, a friend, or family. So before you have a really important conversation, business meeting, partner relationship meeting, I think, again, to engage in that breath work, or even just sort of the thought of being in the moment, is going to have a better outcome ultimately. I mean, don't you? I think that's part and parcel of the whole.
Yeah, you got to drop off your luggage, so to
Yeah.
speak, before you go to engage with other people. And that's why I talk so much about morning routines, like with my
Right.
clients and that, because it's like I said at the beginning of the call, if I wake up with this default, negative scarcity mindset, I have to kind of work myself through it before I approach the world, because otherwise it's a disservice to my clients or to my family or whoever it is, so drop off your own bullcrap first before you deal with everybody else, because otherwise you're projecting, right? If you fail to reflect, you project, right? So that's one of
Absolutely.
those things.
Absolutely. And engaging in, regular loving kindness meditation, to cultivate feelings of goodwill toward not just yourself, but others before you enter into these discussions, right? I think that's an interesting trick a lot of people fail to, leverage, feel your, like, breathe through your heart. It's incredible that we know about the gut brain connection. We test for it at the DNA company. The microbiome 360 is an amazing test to learn about the microbiome and how the gut, when that's upset, this is upset, and vice versa. When this is upset, the but the two-way connection between the brain and the heart, holy crow, there are more signals that go from your heart to your brain, as you know, Justin, than from your brain to your heart. What does that say? That says maybe the traditional Chinese medicine has had it right all these years. Thousands of years ago, this is like the heart of human emotion versus being in the prefrontal cortex might actually be in the heart. So when you breathe through your heart and you have that grounded, mindful moment, you're probably just more literally and figuratively speaking, more open to listen, communicate effectively, and again, foster stronger relationships. Okay, I want to, we got to get some questions because we got a bunch that we want to get through, a bunch of really good questions here. I don't want to unpack this in its entirety, but I do want to just touch very briefly on this idea of incorporating mindfulness into daily life as it pertains to eating habits. We study this, it's a part and parcel to the 360, mindfulness eating, and this whole bloody GLP-1 phenomenon. I mean, there is no quick way to just, and this will boomerang, get out of, here's what I'm getting to, and this is what I don't want to do is dive deep too into this, but there is you can supersede these pathways through mindfulness-based eating. I'm not saying that's all you do. Of course, exercise and supplementation, that's right. And I'm not saying there's no place for GLP-1 agonists for diabetic individuals in the minority, right? But this has become an internet sensation. Oprah's now left Weight Watchers, and she's now sort of endorsing these, Ozempic, et cetera. But let's just say when you know your executive function and you understand the intimacy of how these genes all interrelate, and there's a lot of nuance there, and clinicians like you help to unpack this for people, you get to know yourself and your eating habits, not just the macros and micros your body desires, but you get to learn how to mindfully eat, right?
Yeah, well, like there's a reason why prayer before food, it's literally something that puts your body into that receptive parasympathetic state. Like you brought up, Chinese medicine. They also happen to have invented the yin and the yang, and modern interpretation of that would be, sympathetic versus parasympathetic. So taking a moment, being actually present and aware of your food, and by the way, grateful, because there's people who don't have it, and we should all be very grateful when we do. It can literally make it so that you have a better digestive process, having a good mindset, a grateful attitude, for your food. You're going to literally improve the nutrient absorption, everything, the whole downstream effect of that, to where, yeah, you don't need a GLP-1 agonist, just because you actually are aware of the nourishing properties and you're grateful for your food. Be with it for a second. Enjoy the cooking process. Put those spices on. It makes the whole kitchen smell good. Sit down, take a second and just be like, I'm aware and I'm grateful for this food, and get your body into that digestive state. Rest and digest, right? Parasympathetic.
Absolutely. Feel the food moving around, enjoy it, sense every swallow, hear what your stomach might be doing in response. We're not vehicles. We're not there, whether we're, electric vehicle or a gas, not there to pump the stuff in just to satisfy the, downstream energy production that we require. So yes, absolutely. You're bang on. Rest and digest. You can actually induce that. So once again, even just like exercise, you can do mindfulness during exercise. You can do mindfulness during communication. You can do mindfulness before a stressful event. You can do mindfulness while you're eating. There isn't the right way to do mindfulness. You don't have to be a Buddhist monk, cross your legs and oming your way into mindfulness. So I hope we've been clear on that. Let's answer some questions. Andrew's got a twofold question to begin, asking about the genes that control chattering, rehashing, spinning wheels, right? Mind suggests it's sort of this chatter under control. And then he alludes to the ADR2B gene, which is sort of variants that are either optimal or suboptimal. So just walk us through that again. ADR2B, what it is, what it does, and some of the things that we recommend at the DNA company to manage or optimize that genetic expression.
Yeah, so we talk about these receptor sites, right, for various neurochemicals. So we talk about DRD2, right, for the dopamine, and we talk about noradrenaline, which is more in response to fear, anxiety-based emotions. ADR2B would be the receptor site for that, and we measure it as I's and D's. So there's indels and there's deletions. If you've got two I's in there, it's considered the full version of the gene, to where you're going to be able to process noradrenaline properly. And it just means that you would have a more logical response, right, when you have some kind of traumatic event take place. So 2 I's is the full version. You're going to have a more appropriate response. The second there's a D in there, that represents a deletion, right? So now we've got one of your parents blessed you, one of them did not. So now you're going to have a subdued kind of a response to that. You're going to be more susceptible to anxiety, based on those kinds of emotional, stimuli that you might approach. Then when we have 2 Ds, which is what yours truly has, it means that we're truly going to be making a mountain out of a molehill because they're both deleted, right? So my parents both have 1. I ended up with 0. So I got the short end of both of that. So that just means that you're going to be really feeling it more. And the analogy I've used in the past is, let's say someone has 2 I's and someone has 2 D's, and those 2 people get into a little car accident somewhere. The event was the literal same thing, but the brain's interpretation of the event is way different. I'm going to be way more drastic about it. I'm going to be like, I can't take that left again. That was crazy. I could have killed that person, and it's going to affect me. So that's where more mindfulness is needed if you have a D or if you have 2 Ds in that. So that's how that works. Most people don't have 2 Ds. If you do, then you're like me and you've really got to laser focus on the breath work, the new calm, etc.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to answer the next question. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, as they say. Marissa and Dirk. And so Marissa is asking, how do we convince somebody to train themselves to do mindfulness when they're so negative due to concerns for a future? They're living in the future. Many older males are, and even teenagers. She's bang on. I've got to, and they're not open to mindfulness. And then Dirk says, David Brox, I'm not familiar with him, but a New York Times journalist recently wrote a book on how to know a person called The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen, which admittedly Dirk hasn't read either, but this sounds like it could be valuable. Do you know? And the idea of mind. So I'm answering these 2 questions together because here's why. I don't know that book. I know books and reading about the topic is incredibly helpful, particular for closed-minded individuals. And there's all kinds of levels of reading, but I'm just going to throw out a few to start. If it's a teenager, this book wasn't intended for mindfulness per se, but it's a wonderful short read, very digestible for teens. It's called The 4 Agreements. And if you subscribe to those 4 agreements by Dan Miguel Ruiz, you are essentially adopting or buying into the concept that mindfulness, less in the book being present in the moment practice per se, but you are subscribing to the notion of being mindfulness, and particularly chapter 2, which focuses on don't take anything ever personally. It's a stepping stone in the right direction this way. John Kabat-Zinn, perhaps the most widely recognized name in mindfulness today, founder of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. I would start with his books. Eckhart Tolle is another one. He's an author for all kinds of, as I mentioned, transcending ego-based states of consciousness, and best-selling The Power of Now, right? That's what we're talking about. And A New Earth sold millions of copies. Sharon Salzberg, she's done a number of books as a New York Times bestselling author. So there's a lot of places to start. I think books are a good place to start. Well-referenced books with tangible, as we've described in this last hour, ways in which you can practice this. And I think the more you practice it, in fact, it's a double-edged sword. The more you are open-minded, the more you actually realize that open-mindedness is about spending time with yourself, being comfortable in the now. So, and then Marissa's asking, will theanine capsules help in context of the gene that I mentioned for men? So we mentioned a bunch of genes. Theanine. You want to take that one, actually, Justin? Theanine.
Yeah, I've always found theanine to be very useful. And one thing that's kind of interesting in plants is this homeostatic mechanism, right? So like we talk about even the cannabis plant and how there's THC and then there's CBD, and one is a little bit more stimulating and one is a little bit more calming. So a lot of these plants in nature actually have this kind of dichotomy where they give you a little bit of both. Green tea, obviously has some caffeine in there, and then it's also got L-theanine in there. So you're going to get the up, and then you're also going to get the kind of calming effects. I would say, as far as, Adra 2B and overthinking and too much sympathetic stimulation because of overactive thoughts. Yeah, in my opinion, L-theanine is a good way to kind of down-regulate that response. I think it's a great ingredient to take before bed, for example, or if it's just a higher anxiety day for whatever reason. I think it's a very valuable ingredient. Definitely, I recommend it.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I couldn't agree more. Incredibly calming. And the science is very clear around a relaxed state of focus, attention, and alertness. In fact, 5 of many hundreds of studies done, safety efficacy extends into children for better sleep. So it does execute or help the brain execute on that alpha wave you described earlier. Nothing better than to have excess or high amounts rather of alpha wave going for you to achieve mindfulness. It's that sort of meditative state. And that ability to kind of bring yourself back to now whenever your mind drifts off is accentuated or made easier with theanine. Here's the caveat. Look on your bottle. I don't care what brand anyone uses. Just look on your bottle and make sure that it says sun theanine, which is the only one we use at the DNA company as well, because this is where the research exists within this patented ingredient, which, by the way, although you find theanine, as you're pointing out, in green tea. So drink green tea, but to get a therapeutic dose, we often say this at the DNA company, it's hard to eat yourself to therapeutic values. You often have to take supplements to wash over your genes to dial them up or down vis-a-vis drinking 8 cups of green tea. Because also, to your point, the caffeine in there might actually surge you too high onto that other side. So drink green tea, but probably also supplement with sun theanine in therapeutic ranges, which studies show about 200 milligrams for the average person, 2 to 3 times a day. Better focus, attention, alertness, calmness without sedation, better sleep, better mindfulness. So hope that helps, Marissa. All right. Fareed mentions Max Pulse, looking at mental stress, physical stress, mental resilience, dozens of patients. So Max Pulse, I'm not familiar with Max Pulse. I'm sure Fareed is talking about another sort of technology. Are you familiar with Max Pulse? I mean, we've mentioned a bunch tonight, Newcom and Heart Math and all kinds of others, but I forgive me, Fareed, I'm not familiar with Max Pulse. But he also asked what the SNPs are for mental health and brain health. And does DNA 360 give feedback on practical tips like we're discussing? Oh my gosh, so yes, so this is the point. So please list the important SNPs that we can then study before we order. Okay, so let's go over them again real quick. As they are in context, as we look at not just SNPs, Fareed, so single nucleotide polymorphisms are single letter variations. People misunderstand this as mutations all the time. It's not, do you have a mutation? It is, what variation of a SNP, single nucleotide, do you have? And in context of executive health, mental health, mood, and behavior, there's a number of them that we look at separately and together, the latter of which is more important. So as Justin described sort of applications for each of these, as I went through some of the lists, here's what we're talking about and their benefits to individuals with these, let's call them lesser optimal variations. So with neuroplasticity and brain health, we spend a lot of time with BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. The SNP variant that you ideally don't want is to have an A within that SNP variant, right? Or a double A. So the idea is you're more optimal if you've got a GG variant, that's SNP variant. Okay, stress reduction in the brain, balancing COMT, catecholomethyltransferase, which is the speed at which you uncouple catecholamines, stress, adrenaline, dopamine, et cetera. ADRA 2B, Justin covered that at length. MAO, monoamine oxidase, DRD2, dopamine, how your brain deals with dopamine reward and motivation. 5-HTTL-PR, TPH2, that's serotonergic activity, mood regulation, mental health. So whether it's cognitive function, mood and behavior, sleep-wake cycles. By the way, we have no time to get into that very deeply, but we look at all of that. And that's tip of the iceberg. So in summary, the genes that may predispose you to worry, anxiety, for which you will then benefit from incorporating more mindfulness strategies in your life, is just one of the very excellent things we do at the DNA company. As I mentioned earlier, it's important that, March promotion is also about to end. So if you want to take advantage of the DNA 360 and save $50, or even on the de-aging, and get a free copy of the DNA book. That's available until the 31st. So what have we missed? Anything before we kind of wrap and sign off here? Because I know we're 10 minutes over the hour. So much
Yeah,
talk.
yeah, there's always more, right? I mean, we could just keep going, but the second half of that initial question that Fareed did mention cannabis, which is funny because I had just brought it up, and I actually didn't see that question. But he had said that some people, with cannabis did better, and some people did worse. I think it said he did worse. So what I would point you towards with that one is that there are a lot of scientists and botanists out there that kind of will amplify one characteristic of the plant over another. And some people would have way higher THC, and some people would have way higher CBD. And I do think that that plays a role. Again, if you had green tea and you purposely weeded out the theanine and amplified the caffeine, you're not going to sleep that well, right? But if you did the exact opposite, and it's like a little bit of caffeine with a lot of theanine, now we've got a calming drink. I would say there's a similar aspect there with cannabis. So that could be the case.
Yeah, love it. Okay, so the other thing as we sign up here is really recognizing the long-term benefits. So, you want to acknowledge and reward yourself for small wins. Celebrate these little wins once you incorporate this effort of mindfulness and see that actually things are a little easier. Acknowledge that. Set realistic expectations as well. So understand that progress is gradual and it's sometimes subtle. Educate yourself on the science, some of what we described, some of which is sort of hidden as gems in books, some of those books we've mentioned tonight, and then staying engaged. I mean, to your point, Justin, earlier, like if you don't do this like anything else, it's not going to work for you. If you don't take your supplements, you're not going to cover your micronutrient demands. If you don't, for that matter, know your DNA and where to focus some of these energies and efforts, then, it's a harder challenge. So, pushing the boundaries a little bit and then staying engaged is part and parcel to this. Varying your practice, I think that's important as well. Exploring different types that work for you. And then some instances, joining a mindfulness community. There's all kinds that are available online, just as there are any other sorts of community, maybe even attending a retreat or a workshop that helps focus you on this area. But integrating it into your lifestyle is key for all the reasons we discussed. You want to make mindfulness a daily habit. Could be the first thing when you wake up, could be during your exercise, could be during your food or consumption of pretty much anything, as we discussed. And use the technology to know black and white, proof in the pudding, that it's working for you and that you're getting better over time. And then nothing better than to keep track, like keeping a mindfulness journal, documenting your experiences, what's worked, what's not, reflecting, of course, on your well-being and the outcomes of the mindfulness. And setting mindfulness goals. Like this could be a personal goal, like deepening your practice into ways in which you're looking to see better outcomes in your personal life vis-a-vis, your relationship with your significant other or your children, or perhaps your outcomes at work. I mean, you can set any metrics you want, but I guess we're here to say irrefutably mindfulness, especially for guys. I mean, it's gender neutral, it's cross gender, but we don't do it enough. We don't do this practice enough. I think for that sort of stance we often take as the man up insinuates, stiff upper lip, push through, right? That's not always the way.
Yeah, and always remember too that your mind is a garden, right? So it's up to you what you choose to water. So are you watering the weeds, or are you watering the actual flowers, the foliage, the things that you want in there? What you feed grows and what you starve dies. So your mind is yours, and it's the viewing platform from which you look at the world, right? So your narrative that you choose daily is what's going to either build you or break you. So stop self-sabotaging with those negative narratives. Find some protocols to get that train of thought back onto its right track, so that you can ultimately get to the destination that you want for yourself, your family, your career, everything else.
Bingo. The goal of meditation or mindfulness isn't to control your thoughts. It's to stop letting them control you. So let's end with a quote from Eckhart Tolle. Realize deeply that the present moment is all you have. Make the now the primary focus of your life, and everything else will follow. Justin, as always, buddy, it's a pleasure, brother. We'll until next time, man up. We're out.
Thanks, everybody.
Ciao.